The Antifada is more than a podcast. It's a specter haunting the globe.
It is the synthesis of the two most frightening things for the cheerleaders of this reactionary hell world.
One ravaged by the unbounded savagery of capital and its states.
Antifa super soldiers and Intifada.
Bash the fash in a global uprising.
Be prepared to enter
The Antifada mindset. I'm Jamie Peck,
I'm Sean KB.
and we are broadcasting not live from Leftist Fest headquarters, about a half-hour walk away from the gentrification-ravaged Gowanus Canal in the coastal elite bubble of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA.
That's right, and today we are missing Andy, our producer, who is still at Commie Camp.
No, he's done with Commie Camp now. He's in San Francisco.
Oh, he's doing research on Posadas,
Yeah,
though,
he's
right?
at the library
Yes.
right now, probably as we speak.
Good man. Well, he's still going to edit it for us, but I am proud to welcome into the studio our guest, Wilson Sherwin.
Hey y'all, happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. And Wilson is an activist, an educator, and a PhD student in sociology at the CUNY Grad Center.
Is it fair to say an all-around badass as well?
Depends who you ask.
If you asked me, I'd say, considering the amount of trouble that you and I have gotten into, along with other people in our various organizing, activities, I'd say you could be a little dangerous.
I think you qualify.
It's true. We have had some fun and gone into some raucous times.
Hell yeah. And who is your thesis advisor there at the CUNY Grad Center?
I'm working with the OG herself, Frances Fox Piven.
Notorious F.F.P.
Yes.
Fwah, fwah, pew, pew, pew.
It's funny because like all the liberals, they all freak out about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but like fucking Frances Fox Piven is way more gangster than
Oh
that
my
old
god,
crone.
a million times.
I will see your notorious RBG and raise you our notorious FFP.
Absolutely.
The bane of the right wing, or what? Several years back, right? Glen Beck had a real hate on for your advisor, right?
Yeah, they were burning effigies of her at Tea Party rallies, and she had to have like security detail.
Damn.
Yeah, she really earned her stripes.
Why do you what do you think it was that made her this right wing boogeyman?
Glen Beck traced it back to the article that she wrote in The Nation in 1966 and thought that because of that article, she was single-handedly responsible for the 2008 financial crisis.
Wow.
In a leap of logic.
Did he have all the boards behind him when he did that?
Yeah, exactly. There were
the math,
many boards
okay?
involved.
He needed like
It took him
17.
that long to figure it out.
He needs 17 blackboards just to get from that to the end. He also actually the Invisible Committee, right? He also upped what was it, the coming insurrection, by those very obscure like Takunist anarchists in France, and made them way more popular than they would have been otherwise.
Wow.
Totally.
their
He
shit's
gets
kinda garbage.
books sold.
He does. And
Glenn Beck was freaking out about communists before it was cool.
before we were even running shit in the streets.
So Wilson is one of the rare people we know who actually grew up in New York City.
It's true, I did.
A living, breathing, walking, talking city kid.
Still here, a townie, as I like to be
townie.
called.
Except that in the high season, it's like 4 million people coming into your town instead of like 4,000
Right.
Bar Harbor or something like that.
Right.
And I understand you had a cool living situation growing up.
Well, I grew up in a loft in Tribeca, in the mid-'80s. And when my parents moved in there, when my mom was pregnant with me, there was a gay porn studio downstairs.
Oh,
and
fuck
they
yeah.
very kindly, as they were moving out, gave my mom their washer and dryer because they thought that a woman with a new child would definitely need a washer and dryer. So we had the gay porn studio's washer and
That
dryer
is
my whole
nice.
childhood.
incredible. That's such. I love that solidarity. That social solidarity.
It was good solidarity.
It was a different New York back then, You could
Yeah.
have children live above a gay porn studio in downtown Manhattan. Was it all finance bros and NYU students and all that shit?
Yeah, there was a lot of beauty in the wreckage of post-industrial Tribeca.
Hell yeah. Because of this little thing called white flight, the 5 generations of my family, including my mother and father, who were all from New York City, managed to banish me and my childhood into the fucking suburbs. And fortunately for me, the first love of my life was not Jamie. It was actually a girl named Rachel. She lived very close to here, just steps from here, in Brooklyn Heights. And so I remember the mid-'90s in New York City, and boy, was it a different world. Even Brooklyn Heights, you couldn't go down to Camden Plaza over there. And I also remember, too, that, she's she's doing very well in her life right now. But a lot of the people I met way back then, those city kids, are like super fucked in the head and out of rehab, like totally crazy. I just want to thank you or like applaud you for being so well adjusted.
Well, it was kind of brutal. I mean, like my childhood was bookended by the AIDS crisis, and I spent like the last few months of my life in utero at the AIDS ward in St. Vincent's, where my mom's best friend was dying.
Oh, Jesus.
And like everyone she knew died in a matter of years. And then, my senior year of high school, 9/11. So it was like kind of wild 17 years, right?
And the towers were not far from your home.
Yeah, just like we were like right at the cutoff of where folks had to be evacuated. So New York has definitely changed a lot. It certainly makes me nostalgic for the ways that people were able to make do in that time, and the art they were able to create. And
I am not 15 anymore, but I miss the ability that I had back then as a 15-year-old to just be able to walk into a bodega in Manhattan and buy cigarettes in a 40 and drink it in the streets, which was really real back then. It was great.
Yeah, my first experience of coming to New York City was visiting my friends from camp, because I went to an arts camp in New Jersey.
As one does.
It's a very Jewy place, and I had some friends who lived in the city who were city kids, and I would take the bus from Hartford when I was in high school and visit my friends. And there was this one kid who was like 3 years younger than the rest of us. He was like 13.
This is a news story.
Named Eli Wing. Shout out to Eli Wing. And he had the bottom floor of his parents' brownstone in Park Slope. And that was the first place I ever smoked weed. And actually the second time I ever smoked weed. The first time I got stoned off weed. So, like, we climbed up to the roof. I don't know where his parents were. I never saw them.
That's city parents for you.
We climbed up to the roof.
Free
we
crib.
smoked a bunch of
That's
weed.
right.
I think I was like 15 or 16 at the time. And then it was kind of hard for me to climb back down because there was a ladder. But I did. I remember we went out to this place called Pino's. They had really good pizza, and we went there twice that night. We had 2 pizza dinners. And we went to Prospect Park. We smoked some more weed. Then we came back, and my friends all jammed, because they had a little band, and they would jam in Eli's basement, and they were jamming on some Pixies songs. And I just remember sitting in front of the big speaker that the music was coming out of, and it was like tactile. Like I could feel it. And I was like, God fucking damn it, I love the Pixies.
Wilson, did you have any experiences similar to that?
I hear you're going to educate us on the true origins of the Nutcracker, because that's something that we enjoy drinking at the beach. And I think we talked about it a couple episodes ago, but maybe we don't even know why it's called a Nutcracker. So maybe you could enlighten us.
Before she does, you make it sound so benign. It was a hard correction. Like, she texted me, she's like, I'll fucking explain to you what a fucking Nutcracker is, you dumb fucking schmucks. You fucking bridge and tunnel scum.
I may have just not had coffee when I sent that text message, so forgive me.
We've all been there.
No. Well, so I lived in Harlem for a number of years during and after college, and right next to the Polo Grounds. And the folks in the Polo Grounds are very proud of their Nutcracker, being Nutcracker originators. And that it really came about as like a drink for the Rucker Playground events. And I guess now the sort of story is that following the 2008 crisis, that they started trickling down like throughout the city, that more and more people were kind of looking for like alternative economy things. And that it used to be the only time you could get a Nutcracker in Brooklyn was at the West Indian Day Parade, but now they're all over the place.
Interesting.
So that was my only little addendum. It wasn't.
Oh, that's interesting.
Forget the sharing economy. We want the bathtub economy, because that's definitely where that booze comes from.
What were those things big that they were delivering several years back?
Oh, Frosties.
Frosties.
With a PH.
Do you know Frosties?
Remember this?
Oh, it's a similar thing.
Oh my
yeah,
God, it like blew up on the internet. It was just like pretty similar, I guess. It was like an alcoholic slushie that would get you fucked up, and you had to order them through Instagram, but it ended very quickly once people started blogging about it, like obviously because it's wildly illegal.
Man, the blogs have just ruined everything good about New York.
I know.
They have.
We
Like,
touched on that a
these
couple
people have
episodes ago.
no fucking decency.
So just to make things clear for the listeners, you would go to Instagram and you'd order it, right? And a guy
Yeah,
would
you send
come
them a message, and
then
they would deliver you melting alcoholic slushy, and you would post it on Instagram probably and feel really cool
and get also really fucked up.
and get really drunk.
So
Or you
speaking-
could just add, grain alcohol to a slushy that you get from 7-Eleven, and it would probably have approximately the same outcome.
I think the rumor was that it was actually lean, like it had codeine in it, but I don't think that was ever actually true.
Yeah,
That would be way too expensive and hard
Yeah,
to
right.
mass
Not in
distribute.
2012. Probably not. Do you know why they're called Nutcrackers?
I don't. Maybe because of the the shape, or I don't know.
I've got two theories about that.
They fuck you up so much. I mean, I've definitely seen them take down like 6'5", 250-pound dudes, like just topple like a tree
Hell
from
yeah.
like
Maybe.
one or two nutcrackers.
Maybe they're called that because you fall down and break your nuts.
That could
Get
be
so
possible.
drunk.
It's
Or
entirely
maybe, it's named after the classic ballet with the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies because they do contain lots and lots of sugar.
West Indian guys, I think, are really pretty hyped on that particular piece of ballet. So, I mean, I think that's totally plausible. Speaking of getting really fucked up, Jamie is breaking the internet right now with an incredible story that she wrote for Rolling Stone about a incredible experience that she had just the other day.
Oh my God, it was so dark.
Would you want to tell folks a little bit what happened without going through the whole thing, which they can read about in a wonderful fashion on rollingstone.com?
Yeah, sure. So I attended this festival that was like a combined indie music thing and a TED Talk featuring all the heroes of the Radical Center, not limited to, but including Grover Norquist, Steven Pinker, Hillary Clinton, and that fucking sex robot, Tom Perez.
Gulag. Sex gulag. He goes in the sex gulag. He is pretty hot.
It's like if somebody were to design like a male sex robot designed to appeal to like the women of the hashtag resistance.
The nasty women.
Like, I don't think it could get more perfect than Tom Perez. 3000. So yeah, I went with Will Menaker and Matt Christman of Chapo Trap House.
Shout out to a show you may not have heard of. We encourage everybody to check it out. It's called Chapo Trap House. Pretty funny stuff.
Yeah, if you like the Antifada, you'll probably enjoy them.
It was good of us to give them the shout out. They really need it.
Yeah, you're welcome, guys. And it was super fun. I guess I've done a lot of this kind of thing in my life, in my career, when I used to be a music and nightlife reporter.
Jamie's saying that she's destroyed her brain with LSD, but yes, go on.
I mean, partially, yes. But not only LSD, like other drugs too. But you got to mix it up sometimes. But yeah, I kind of stopped doing it for a while, not because I didn't like to, but because I got the sense that like people didn't really respect me because of it, and like my writing wasn't really being received in the way I wanted it to. And like people, I mean, the problem is I made it look too easy.
Yeah, you're just so good at it. I mean, you got Jesus and Mary Chain doing meth backstage.
I did do
hanging out
meth with the Jesus and Mary Chain.
With Wayne Coyne of the Flaming Lips.
I did, yes.
Getting him what, Molly? Was that?
Yeah, I've done Molly with Wayne Coyne multiple times actually, and we played with a bunch of toys that he bought at the toy store that day in Austin, and it was pretty fun, pretty weird. I had fun meeting him and his 21-year-old girlfriend. It was a good time.
So this was not your first rodeo.
No, but I stopped doing it for a very long time because I sensed it was kind of ruining my career a little bit, and that was all anyone wanted to pay me to do at this point in time. It's like, I would like to write a serious op-ed about the Democratic Party, and they're like, oh, haha, no, just here, have more drugs, write about that. But
you haven't done a PCP with Lil Wayne yet. We're going to throw you in.
Well, life is long, but I kind of miss the gonzo journalism. And since I stopped doing it before I pivoted to mainly writing about politics. And then I've been writing mainly about politics since probably 2016, I would say. But I've always missed it and wanted to reincorporate it somehow into my current work. And it was kind of a dream come true to do this for Rolling Stone, because I grew up reading Hunter S. Thompson and wanting to sort of do my own like socialist feminist take on this traditionally very masculine form of writing. So it was super fun. It was super special. I convinced Matt and Will that I was a really good drug mom and nothing bad could happen when they were with me. And that turned out to be true. So it was, I wouldn't say it was fun exactly, but yeah, it was fun. It was kind of fun. The event itself was horrible. You can read all about it in Rolling Stone. But it was funny on the way up in the elevator when I told Wilson that I saw Hillary Clinton on LSD. She was like...
The look in her eyes.
I thought you meant either scenario is horrifying, to be honest.
But the one you thought was...
I did think this meant that Hillary was on LSD for a second.
God. And like, for a second, I was like, oh, well, that might do her some good. And then I remembered, like... You know, drugs, they're like technology. They're like brain technology. Like, they're only as good or bad as the hands that they're in. And if Hillary did LSD, like, you know, took a little walk in the woods, I imagine it would be a lot like the time that Tony Soprano did peyote after murdering Chris. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't watched The Sopranos yet. And,
idiots.
And at the end...
You did this to yourself. You should have watched.
And at the end, he's just like a less conflicted murderer and goes on his way. And that's...
Do we need Hillary? Do we need Hillary to be that self-actualized? Like, I don't think so.
I feel like I'm bad tripping just thinking about being on acid around Hillary Clinton.
It was really real. It got dark for a minute. Like at the end, there was this guy who was yelling, "Run again!
No,
Hillary 2020.
Don't run again.
Hillary's a real progressive.
No.
She's been a progressive her whole life." I thought it was this irony bro who'd come up to Will and Matt earlier and said, "Oh, I love your show. I'm here ironically. Can we take a picture together?" And Matt's like, "Oh no, that's a different guy." And I didn't believe him. And then the first guy came back and I realized they looked nothing like each other and that guy yelling was for real. And I just started laughing and crying hysterically at the same time. Oh my God.
Well, Jamie went to war. She fought some battles.
You're welcome for my service.
Some outer demons, along with some inner demons.
Some
mostly outer
demons.
Mostly outer demons.
Some lesser demons.
But she fought them, and the better angels of her nature brought her back. You know, from my side of the story, as Jamie's partner, and also somebody who knew about this escapade in advance, and was trying to get in touch with her throughout the day to no avail, and was vaguely concerned because I know that Jamie
she'd been arrested.
You never know. I mean, we're on a bad trip because
there were a lot of cops there.
Jamie is like a very experienced psychonaut. Like I knew she could handle this horrific experience, but I thought maybe if anything could break her, it would be like sitting there with like the tech and corporate elite just getting buzzwords like thrown at her face while just tripping face on
curriculum
fucking acid.
Product. Put hope on the ballot. Putin's poodle.
I was a little worried for her, but we finally got in touch, and she said, it took a while for it to kick in, but it did kick in, and everything went fine.
It took all the skills at my disposal, for sure.
She did a great job. And then there's an addendum to the story because, this Rolling Stone story that came out and then the Chapo episode that just dropped yesterday about this, makes all this media seem like a finished product. This is very polished, narrative with like some insight in it. And I think Jamie's story had some great insights and really, really funny moments in it.
Thanks, babe.
It was great. And it's, like I said, blowing up the internet right now. But the actual process of producing that is absolutely fucking grueling. So like it was raining like shit. She finally went back to Will Menaker's house. I took a car over there because I was at a buddy's house in Flatbush. The three of them were like, they were pretty, I think, coming down at this point in time, but they were definitely watching Total Recall and like pounding fucking beers like on the couch. Just like, I'm sure much weed was smoked at that before that and during and after. But like, they really, went through this intense battle. Eventually we went home that night and Jamie actually managed to sleep. Then the next day, which was yesterday, she banged out for like 10 hours straight. Clack, 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 clack. This is not easy to do, folks. Like, she was like a fucking writing machine.
Don't try this
away.
at home.
Yeah, like dead ass, like 10 fucking hours straight. And I took the role because I am out of work right now.
And by the way, sorry, I do not normally take 10 hours to write an article, but I was extremely fried the day after doing acid. So
Oh yeah, surprise, surprise. Well, I mean, your work is reflected in how good it is, but this kind of is a little segue to what we're going to be talking about today, because I'm out of work right now because the company I was working for doing heavy construction slowed down. So I'm at home being the domestic dad in the household, and I'm proud to say, and I'm happy, and I've got no hang-ups about this whatsoever. I made her tea, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Every time she needed water, came and got it for her. I helped her out as much as I could. I basically, I don't know, was like reproducing her social labor within the house as she produced. The site of production was our household, and I was an integral part to that process of production.
that's my woke bae.
The invisible labor.
Mm-hmm.
So
Behind every great woman gonzo journalist, there is an equally great man cooking her breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
that's right. So, Jamie, I think the most horrifying thing that you had to face was the queen, godmother of hashtag resistance people everywhere, Hillary Clinton, in the flesh on acid. Again, applause for being able to actually do that without jumping off a bridge or something like that. What if we're going to talk about domestic labor? We're going to talk about issues with the gender division of labor. We're going to talk about historical and present fights for justice. Do you want to maybe explain for folks, Wilson and Jamie, the difference between, say, Hillary Clinton's brand of feminism and your brands of feminism?
Yeah.
We
Or are
would
they
love
the same?
to.
Are they the same?
Well, you were just in the belly of the beast. Do you want to?
Oh my God. I mean, I should start out by saying that I'm not one of those psychotic people who like obsessively hates everything about Hillary. There's actually a
I might
lot.
be.
I mean, no offense to anyone in the room who might be like that.
So for the first time, there's actually more Goyim in the studio than there are Jews. So Wilson and I, our hate so pure that we outnumber you on that.
Oh my God, we forgot to ask the question.
Ask the fucking
Are you,
question.
and also, are you implying that Jews' hate is less pure than everyone else's?
I mean, Glen Beck might think so. I've never read the Protocols of the Elders on Zion. I don't know these. I mean, I'm open. You know.
I mean, if you count self-hate, it's probably the most pure.
That's true. Yeah.
Oh, man. I mean, speaking of which, my hate is incredibly pure today, having been purified in the fires of the neoliberal death machine that I faced yesterday.
So let's ask the fucking question, and then we're gonna get on.
All right, here we go. Wilson, how pure is your hate today?
Oh man, my hate is pretty fucking pure. It's a boiling, raging, feminazi hatred that is just pure as can be.
I love the question because every answer, like, that's either quantitative, like people give a number, or they make awesome metaphors like scintillate, like boiling hot, like so evocative. Hate is just such a wonderful emotion.
Yeah, I think it's really underrated. Maybe even misunderstood by the people making the DSM or whatever.
And we're pro-fem Nazis. If there's any Nazis we like, it's feminazis.
Absolutely. That, it's funny. They've really stopped calling us that since like Nazis have come back into fashion in a big way.
It's a bridge too far, even for the right.
They're erasing feminazi voices.
Oh my God. So as I was saying, I don't hate everything about Hillary. I think she's a strong woman. I admire that about her. She's clearly very smart, very tough. I like her.
Beware super predator. She's tough.
I like her witch-like cackle. I could only hope to someday have a cackle half as harsh, grating, and castrating as hers. And that is a compliment coming from me because I am a feminazi as well.
Oh, I'm outnumbered now.
And she's dealt with a lot of bullshit, a lot of sexist bullshit throughout her life, which I certainly have empathy for. But she's not on our side, and she never will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, what separates her from the good feminazis of the world?
Well, I guess I have a way that I like to kind of distinguish it that is pretty basic, which I think that the kind of bourgeois feminists, that Hillary Clinton is a kind of model example of, want their slice of the pie, right? They think that if they get a slice of the pie, the world will be somehow more equal. Or maybe they want to have like a little bit more of a say in like what ingredients go into the pie. And I think the radical feminists or the, Marxist feminists or the socialist feminists, depending on who's talking, want to look at the whole process and say, actually, we want the whole bakery. And we think that it's immoral, the labor that's going into it and the way that different people get different remuneration for their work. And we think it's like not environmentally viable the way these ingredients are being sourced. And that, this bourgeois feminist kind of obsession with, if I just also have a slice of this pie, I'll be fine, is just totally crazy. Valerie Solanas has this
friend of the show has I think the most perfect way of describing the difference between radical feminists and bourgeois feminists. And she says, we don't want to co-manage the shit pile. Hell yeah. And I like that. That's it to me, right? Like we need to radically reconfigure it all, not just co-manage this shithole.
And even as somebody who, if Valerie Solanas had had her way, would have been summarily executed after my sperm was taken from me, I agree with that sentiment.
That's really big of you, babe.
A society for cutting up men sounds harsh, but, I can roll with it.
That's what we like to hear.
Solidarity forever.
That is the Antifada mindset.
An administrative note, this is being recorded on a Monday evening, and by the time this episode arrives in your podcast listening app of choice, we will have released the world historical debut of Acid Motherfucking Kitchen.
Wah, wah. Talk about fire. We got acid. We got a kitchen. We got pizza.
We got sexy Jamie Peck dressed as a pizza.
We got everything you've ever wanted, folks. So I guess we really have to release it now.
And even if you didn't go to Ozy Fest on acid, watching the video will make you feel like you're on acid having a horrible time.
Well, this video is we're having a good time.
No, let's sell it like they're going to be horrified by it. Like it's like Ringo or something like that. Like, oh, acid kitchen.
You have to show it to 10 people or you will die in 10 days. That's a really good way to get patrons, actually, babe, because you have to be a patron to watch the video.
Threaten their lives.
Oh, P.S. Join Antifada. Give us money. Our show relies on your support. And we've got some, pretty cool stuff that you get if you're a patron, right,
We've
babe?
got a cool little Discord. It's growing by the day, and we've got some fun conversations.
Tell them what Discord is.
Discord is a little app you put on your phone.
It's a chat room.
It's a chat room.
It's a chat room with different channels. It's like a Slack.
It's like a Slack. For communists. It's all communists all the time. There's a couple of socialists, but we kind of, put them to the side. They're able to chime in every once in a while. They're marginal
characters.
We marginalize socialist voices.
Sometimes we do a voice chat
in there.
We do
a little voice chat in there.
Probably not as much as we could or should.
You can talk to us about our show and tell us how much we suck or give us suggestions on other shows. Sometimes the guests from our shows will pop in and be really upset that we were talking shit on them about their performance on our show. Also, you get Acid Kitchen, which is going to be one of many videos we're going to be producing with all of the Patreon money that we've been just sacking away there. The thousands and millions of Patreon dollars that we have in our production budget now. So there's a lot of perks to becoming an Antifada super soldier. And one of them is that you will not get the wall.
Boom. So, yeah, I like the way that Adolf Reed talks about neoliberal identity politics as well. Now, I don't agree with him on everything, but he's got a very good analysis of this where, I'm wildly paraphrasing, but according to neoliberal identity politics, it's enough to maintain the hierarchy of our society if the ruling class has a proportional representation of women, people of color, LGBT people, et cetera, whereas socialist feminism is about saying, no, that's not enough for us. We want radical equality for all of humanity and not just the lucky few women. And also, I'm not going to pretend that, Marxism is at the fulcrum of our analysis.
Indeed.
And I'm not going to pretend like I have a ton of common interests with a woman who is like the CEO of the company that I work for, who's exploiting me, because yeah, we might have some overlapping interests as women living in patriarchy, but on a very basic level, we are in conflict with one another, and neoliberal identity politics tries to conceal that any way it can.
Now, some might push back on that and say, well, oh, you don't appreciate the gains that women have made in the workplace, or there being more, congresswomen and senators who are women, and almost a, president of the United States who is a woman. Where would you...
The almost president.
The almost president. She did win the popular vote,
true.
and if it wasn't for Russian Comey, she would have won the goddamn fucking election. That was the takeaway from the Ozy Fest thing, as I understand it.
Yeah, that was the primary takeaway from her talk.
What would you, how would you to respond to somebody who said, like, oh, well, so you just want women to wait for, like, some utopian fucking socialist revolution? What are we supposed to do now with your Marxist feminism? Besides, say, go fuck yourself.
I think that in a lot of ways, we've had 50 years of feminism, of like, go to work and you'll be liberated. And we've seen that really doesn't pan out, right? Like, women are in huge debt. They don't have maternity leave. They are disproportionately poor. They're still, getting their asses kicked by their spouses on the regular. I mean, just yesterday was like a horrific day it seemed like every news story was about women getting shot, like in Toronto, in California, right? I mean, like, the level of misogyny hasn't necessarily really been radically transformed by women entering the workforce and, like, being bosses and being CEOs. And I don't know, I don't think I answered that well.
I mean, I think some gains have definitely been made, right? Like, I like it that I have the option to do what I do for work instead of having to be, like, barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, which is not something that I'm terribly interested in.
And Jamie also appreciates that we use abortion as birth control in our house.
Indeed. No, shout out to IUDs. It's kept me baby free for quite some time now. But
amen.
Hell yeah. This episode,
I'll give an amen to that
Antifada,
too.
brought to you by IUD,
by Marina.
The letters I, U, and D.
I'll give a hallelujah to that.
Yeah, like, I like it that it's no longer acceptable for your boss to, like, smack you on the ass and call you sweetie or whatever. Like, there certainly have been gains made. I mean, I like having
But, like, since when is that not acceptable? It's, like, not acceptable since Me Too, since, like, 6 months ago. I mean, part of, like, what we're seeing is that that's still, like, totally widespread.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But, like, I think it's definitely changed a lot from how it used to be, and we still have a pretty long way to go. I think we've made all the progress we're going to make in terms of the law, right? Like, I think it's a mistake to say that we just need better and better laws and more, like, harsh penalties for this. That's a total that's a bad road that socialist feminists don't want to go down. But, like, at least we have laws against sexual harassment now. Like, that's a good thing. It's never going to take us all the way. And I think that's a critique that I have made in the past of the Me Too movement, which I'm like, I have critical support for it, right? Like, I think it's really good that people are talking about this stuff. I think it's really good that people are feeling less alone and telling their stories and raising awareness, which, a lot of men that I've talked to were, like, totally bowled over by just, like, the volume and severity of these stories. And, like, it's even worse than I thought it was, right? And, like, I already thought it was pretty fucking bad, just judging from my own experience. But, they say vulgar Marxism explains 90% of the world, and the other 10% is not nothing. But I think most of the discourse we've seen around Me Too kind of stays within that 10% and doesn't really go outside of it to see, like, these are crimes of power imbalance. And the way you fix it, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, at least, if you fix the power imbalances rather than trying to change people's hearts and minds and raise consciousness. So, like, things like socialized medicine, socialized healthcare, they reduce women's dependence on men and on their jobs, and increase their ability to, I mean, unions, obviously a huge thing, and increase our ability to stand up to bosses and husbands and whoever else is abusing us from a position of authority.
And just to jump in, and I think that the ability of a woman to gain the dubious distinction of independence under capitalist society by getting a job and being able to actualize themselves in the ways that capitalism allows people to do that is a well and good thing. But capitalism as a contradictory system means that women are allowed in the workplace now, which is good. However, it means that more and more households are surviving on two incomes. So now you have a lot more wage labor being spread across society and people working a lot of hours when ultimately our politics here at the Antifada are anti-wage labor politics. So it's good for people to be allowed into that wage labor market, but we need to have a critique of that. You're working on a research project, Wilson, now, right? That kind of analyzed this historically?
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of archival work and writing about the National Welfare Rights Organization, which was this really rad social movement in the 60s and 70s of mostly welfare moms getting in the streets, in the courtrooms, and taking over welfare offices and demanding basically the paychecks that they felt that they were due. And they've been remembered in these really kind of liberal ways. So a lot of folks who have written about them talk about them as kind of like maternalist. They were just moms who wanted to be able to stay home with their kids. And it was important that they were Black moms who were sort of reclaiming the right to stay home with their kids when white women had this privilege. And in going back and looking at the movement, I found all this incredible stuff where they really kind of take this, they're very different than Solanas in a lot of ways, but where they take this, we don't want to co-manage the shit pile position. And they really distinguish themselves from like two movements that they were sandwiched between, the civil rights movement and the mainstream feminist movement, by their refusal and their rejection of work.
That is definitely Antifada mindset politics right there. So this was, is it fair to say this was a grassroots direct action mass-based struggle movement?
Yeah, I mean, the NWRO formed in 1966, and kind of because it saw that this guy, George Wiley, wanted to do something about poverty, and he saw that there were so many independent grassroots welfare rights organizations that had popped up all over the country. There were like more than 200 of them who were really militant and really mobilizing around the issue of poverty. And so it kind of came out of that, although the organization itself maybe wasn't exactly grassroots. But yeah.
That's really interesting. And like, forgive me if this is a boring, wonky question, listeners, but I've been thinking a lot about the structure of socialist organizations lately. I've been thinking a lot about the structure of DSA versus one like ISO. Like, how did they balance sort of the centralist idea with having all the different chapters be autonomous?
Yeah, they were pretty autonomous and then had national conventions every once in a while, but there certainly was no like top-down directive. On this question, so Frances Fox Piven, my advisor, was really involved in the organization. She was like a theorist and an activist involved with it. And she wrote about it later. And like the big insight that she got out of it was the sort of broader one about social movements, about the kind of tendency towards oligarchy or towards a kind of static institutionalization that she and her partner, Richard Cloward, felt is really unfortunate, because all of these resources and all of these efforts get put into maintaining the organization rather than actually drawing from what the real source of power of poor people is. Like that the source of power of poor people isn't organizational, it's actually disruptive. And so in all this focus on like creating the organization and maintaining the organization, it like stifled the militancy.
I think that there's a lot of parallels with that when you look at the labor movement, for example. And obviously these are struggles that are directly or indirectly against the wage system as it exists, right? So it makes sense that there's this kind of push and pull, this dialectic between grassroots militancy, but also the real institutional and organizational capacity necessary to maintain something. Another question I have is, what's the context? You mentioned these other civil rights movements. What's the historical context in the 60s and 70s that makes this a point of struggle and a moment of struggle?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are familiar with the ways that the 60s was a really turbulent time. And the welfare rights movement is really interesting to me in the way that they kind of reject the solutions that other movements put forward. So, the freedom budget that A. Philip Randolph and a lot of other major civil rights luminaries who were, socialist of varying stripes, felt was the solution to the crisis of life for Black Americans. And the center of that to them was jobs, 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 full employment. And jobs are going to be the solution to all of the problems that Black America is facing. And, similarly, like Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, came out in 1963, really saying like the solution to women's problems is leaving the confines of the house and going into the workforce. And these women, I think, in a lot of ways, like really presage a movement that gets a lot more attention for being radical, which is like the Wages for Housework movement, or something like the Combahee River Collective, and looking at the ways that women are really stuck in the shittiest jobs and still have a ton of responsibility at home. And that for these women who had been working all their lives, like more work was not the solution. To them, it was constantly like their refrain was more money now. And our problems aren't going to be solved by jobs, but by income. That was really their emphasis, was income is the solution, not work.
Yeah, that reminds me of some stuff I read in my Soc Fem reading group, actually, from some early Bolshevik thinkers, where they were trying to figure out how to bring women into this proletarian struggle. And there were some who thought that women needed to become workers first. Basically, they needed to become proletarianized so they could fight alongside the men in the factories and wherever the shop floor was. And there were others who thought that that was not a necessary intermediary step. They could turn the domestic sphere into a site of struggle as well. And that's what I think of when you talk about the Wages for Housework movement that started in the 70s.
Yeah, totally. And so like, I don't know, I want to like get there, but I also just want to point out like a couple of other things that were going on in that time that I think were maybe influential, at least sort of in the air, if not directly. Yeah, it definitely like presages the Wages for Housework stuff. And I think that we see these kinds of like threads in the movement of a lot of fundamental socialist and socialist feminist thinking that have really been kind of covered over by all of the scholars who've looked at it. Kristen Ross has this amazing quote when she talks about the way sociologists have talked about 68 in France, where she says that sociologists play the function to history that police play to the present. So basically in saying, nothing to see here, folks, keep it moving. And I really feel like that's what people have done with the welfare rights movement. There's been this kind of like cover up of how really fundamentally radical their demands for income decoupled from labor were.
What are the social conditions at heart here, that these women are responding to in this movement, and why did they respond to it in the particular way that they did?
I think that one of the things that's cool about them is they're really responding to a lot of political economic transformations. So the kind of specter of technological unemployment factored really big in their thinking.
So the Great Society is happening at this moment. That must have been a bit of a top-down sort of state impetus to these people to start thinking differently, right, about their relationship to work and to the state and their demands.
Yeah, it was a moment where there was actually a kind of generous expansion of the welfare state and a belief that this had to happen really, in order to quell the riots. And there was also a lot of mobilization, like on the part of the Panthers, around the idea of wagelessness as a viable political position, right? Like the radical position of the lumpen proletariat. It's not just the people in the factories who are important to society or who are contributing to society.
Yeah, I was really interested in that part because I think when we think of organizing traditionally, you think of organizing in the workplace where you have your labor to withhold as you see fit to extract concessions from capital. But when people are not employed, like how do you organize people who are not in the traditional workplace? What are the pressure points there, the sort of fulcrums of power?
Well, they had a lot of power because there were actual offices that you had to go to in order to, deal with all of the bureaucratic stuff of welfare. And I think that was certainly kind of a choke point that gave them a space to meet in, a space to really get the goods and to see how direct action was getting the goods. Walk home with a check for $100 in 1968. It was a lot of fucking money. But they also had really, I think, kind of sophisticated understandings of the ways that their reproductive labor was both creating the labor force for the future and, keep in mind that this was during Vietnam. And, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the horrible senator who decided that the cure for all of the problems with the quote unquote Negro family was to send black men to Vietnam to teach them how to be real men. And these women, were aware of the fact that their labor in producing these children was being used either to send them to the factories or to send them to Vietnam. And I think, it's a particularly cool moment because a lot of mainstream feminists or even socialist feminists were sort of grappling with how do we intervene in the question of Vietnam? Like, it's not really about us. It's not a women's question. We have to think about like women's issues. And these women, for them, it was so clear how this is obviously a woman's issue. How reproductive labor is the kind of central point in all of these social issues.
Yeah, can you say more about the reproductive labor? Because I feel like this is something a lot of people miss. When you hear people talk about welfare now, like it's just money for nothing.
It's dependency. It's a cycle of dependency, and it's hardworking tax dollars going to these layabouts.
Yeah, like do you want to dissect that idea a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to be a little careful here because a lot of people in their interpretation of the welfare rights movement have understood it as like these women wanted to be housewives in the same way that white middle class women were allowed to be housewives throughout history. And I don't think that's exactly what they were asking for. Partially, they're bringing attention to the ways that their care labor is labor and deserves remuneration, right? Like raising kids and putting food on the table. And they especially pointed out how much incredibly hard work this is on a really tight budget, right? That this is like one of the hardest tasks in the world is how to feed and figure out a family. But beyond that, and this is the thing that I think a lot of folks have missed that is really powerful, is that what they saw as the work that they needed to be doing and that these welfare checks allowed them to do was political work and was organizing. And the change that they felt they could make in their communities and that they saw themselves being able to make was really the thing. And, you like go back and reading these newspapers, these testimonies from these women who were like, yeah, I was kind of lost in my life and I joined this organization and I never really spoke very much. And now I'm like the leader of the state chapter and no one can get me to shut up. And I've like totally found my calling. And, I think that this is like dichotomy of are they going to be like out in the public at a job or are they going to be stuck at home with the kids is a really false one, right? That they actually were in the public doing a lot of amazing community work that was possible because of these checks.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All right, so you said that these welfare offices were this node, this point where these activists, these militants could go and be disruptive. What did it mean in this context to be disruptive? What was their power to disrupt?
Well, what they really disrupted was the funding. So Frances Fox Piven and Richard Cloward did this study where they found that only half of the people who were eligible for welfare benefits were actually receiving them because of a lot of kind of bureaucratic mess, and a lot of people were getting turned away who shouldn't have gotten turned away. And the disruption that they caused was really to flood the offices demanding all of these benefits that they were owed. And the amount of funding that then was being spent, both the number of people who were receiving checks and the amount of checks, just skyrocketed in a number of years. I think in one year they managed to get over $50 million from the city of New York alone. You know, in the 60s, this is a huge amount of money. So this really caused a kind of crisis situation, right? And this was really the epitome of Piven and Cloward's crisis theory, right? In order to bring about a federalized system of welfare benefits, because all of these meager, racist, state-based programs needed to be overhauled, and that the way to do this was to force basically the federal government to step in because the states couldn't afford these mounting costs anymore, and they hoped that they would implement a universal basic income.
There you go.
And how did that work? Like, I know they swung away from this strategy at one point because other people argued that it was easier to create a crisis than bring about a solution to the crisis. And I guess they just didn't trust the federal government to solve it in any kind of positive way. Like, how did it work out for them?
Well, it didn't work out great, partially because of, I think at least, this is Francis's explanation, the emphasis on organization. So they spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying to really build this organization. You have the kind of decline of the mass mobilization in the street. One of the ways that they were able to sort of threaten the government and get what they wanted was because there were so many riots going on at the time. And they quite literally say, like, if you don't want our sons in the streets burning shit down, give us more checks. And with the kind of subsiding of mass mobilization and militancy that was going on across the country in different movements, I think part of their threat was less weighty. And Nixon proposes this guaranteed annual income that was in 1971, that was very, very, very small. It was smaller than the annual welfare benefits in most states, except for like the two cheapest southern states. And the NWRO fought it very vehemently. And, in this narrative, as it's told, one of the big things that's always left out is that they fought it really vehemently because it had work requirements attached to it.
Interesting.
And so they were pissed off that the amount was so low, and they refused to work for that money. Right.
So just to play devil's advocate for a minute, there are plenty of people out there who say, you have to work. If people aren't working, society will cease to function, and everyone will starve to death. And like the only way to make people work is to basically force them on pain of starving to death. So, like, how's that even going to work if nobody has to go to work? Like, won't we all just be, like, sitting around just, like, masturbating and playing video games all day?
Yes,
like, what's going to happen? Doing drugs? Like what?
That all sounds great,
That's
actually.
my plan. Masturbate in the morning, read theory in the afternoon.
Do drugs at night.
But never be a masturbator, theorizer, or drug user.
It's going to be so lit.
So yeah, now we're getting to sort of the political horizon that's opened up by this sort of anti-work kind of ideology that arises out of this struggle, right? This sense that more jobs aren't the solution, even better paying jobs aren't the solution, and in fact, it's work itself that is alienating. It's wage labor itself that's alienating. It seems to me that there is this sort of political horizon that opens up in this period of real abundance, for most Americans, white Americans especially, in the 1960s and early 70s, not just of jobs, but also of material goods. You have capitalism through automation, advancing, and you have, I think, in popular culture, and I think in the popular imagination, this real sense, and even Valerie Solanas talks about a fully automated society, right? You have this real sense that the political horizon is the abolition of wage labor as this sort of, as Jamie said, necessary evil that you have to do on pain of starvation and death.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that like the moment of technological change is really important to this story, and of the clear sense of automation, right? I mean, the percentage of Americans who worked in agriculture 100 years ago that we needed in order to produce the amount of food that we eat was well over 50%. And so, with automation, with technological advancements, we increase our productivity and our ability to produce the things that we need. And the thing that I think is really the question is, how do we redistribute access to them, and access to free time as a really important aspect of our lives that we need to struggle for. And I think like a lot of people have sort of tried to describe the care labor that they're doing as work, as a way to justify this. And I think that the political stuff is also something that they see as sort of work, or at least a productive contribution to society.
So I think this gets to one of the fundamental contradictions of capitalism, right? And also one of, I think, the misconceptions about what work is nowadays, right? Because when we go and we talk about a post-work society, and when these women are rejecting work, right? They're not rejecting, as you said, like productive things like, caring for children, or having a nice house, or even going out and, making a tangible good or providing a tangible service.
Volunteering in their community.
Doing politics. What they're rejecting, or they were trying to reject and critiquing, was and is today this contradiction between what is productive and useful, but also what is exploitative. Because the particular type of labor that they were critiquing then, and we can critique now, is wage labor, right? So you do this work, and you spend your time, and you use your brains, and you use your muscles. The end product of that goes off and is owned by somebody else, and all you get is a paycheck that allows you to just reproduce yourself for another day. Now, to say that you want to get rid of work doesn't mean that nothing will be done. It means that we want to eliminate the social relationship. That means that there are the people who actually produce things and the people who exploit the labor and take that as profits.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think their examples are really kind of illuminating in that they often were doing like the same exact tasks at home in taking care of children and cleaning the house as they would then be forced to do in a lot of these workfare programs, and being sort of pushed into domestic labor, where you're doing the same exact activity. You're mopping a floor, you're wiping an ass, you're cooking a meal, except you have, Marx got this totally right, that not having control over both the process and the product of your labor is deeply alienating, and really kind of separates you from the thing that makes you human. And so if you don't have the autonomy over what you're cooking, you don't get to eat it after you cooked it.
Right.
You don't get to stay in touch with the children after you raised them. You don't have any say in the disciplinary tactics that you use, right? This is like, it's the epitome of alienated labor.
Yeah, so I also wanted to ask a question about wages against housework, because what we have been talking about sounds a lot like wages for housework, I guess. Just the idea that like all of this reproductive labor is done in service of capital, right? Because you really can't wall off the traditional workplace from the domestic sphere when you are reproducing the next generation of workers, or even the current generation of workers, so that they can just keep on going back to their shitty jobs at the end of the day, every day. And I really like the way Silvia Federici kind of flipped it on its head and called it wages against housework, because that even goes a step further than the model where, we're all contributing productively to capitalist society and we should be getting paid for it, whether that work is in a factory or in the home. Whereas wages against housework, I mean, I read it as sort of a provocation, right? Because she wasn't saying we just need to get welfare for the housework that we're doing. She was saying we need to figure this the fuck out and eventually abolish it. And that, again, reminds me of early Bolshevik thinkers like Kollontai talked about this quite a bit, and others. The idea that eventually this kind of Sisyphusian drudgery, right, should be socialized to the degree that that's possible, which it is, and have like socialized childcare, cafeterias, right? Like how much time do we all spend just like cooking our food and then cleaning up afterwards so that we can, live to fight another day? And I think that is really, I mean, it's exciting to me because I fucking hate cleaning my house.
Oh, yeah, we do.
As anyone who's seen it. will know.
We won't show you pictures. They're not safe for work.
Yeah, just take our word for it. It's not great. But like, yeah, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really love about the folks who are involved in Wages For or Against Housework, their articulation is when they're faced with this kind of question of like, well, it's too expensive. How would we ever afford that? And I think that this is really congruous with the NWRO's analysis, which is their response was, it's not our fucking job to figure out what is too expensive for the system. If it's too expensive for the system, you know, and the welfare rights movement fought for this right to live. That was what they wanted. If it's too expensive to guarantee people a right to live, then change the system, right? It's not our job to figure out what is within the constraints of this terrible world. Part of, and I think that this is like a similarity that they both share, is this kind of crisis tactic, right? By, you know, the Wages for Housework or Against Housework folks wanted to make housework too expensive. That was the point. If we all have to get paid for it, it will be too expensive and we will have to figure something else out. And that's a very similar technique that the welfare rights movement had, right? Like, okay, if it's too expensive, figure it out a different way. But like, we deserve the right to live decoupled from employment.
And as I understand it too, like Jamie said before, this sort of false dichotomy between the shop floor and the kitchen floor, right? It's making that labor, that free, unpaid, unremunerated labor of the domestic sphere visible, and saying that this is, you know, it may seem free to you, but there are millions upon millions of women and men and others who are doing these activities day in and day out, and we refuse to be invisible anymore.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and that goes back to the materialist argument as well, right? Because you know, I think we need both ideals, ethics, and materialism. And one thing I like about Marxism is it's really got both. Like, these are things that I know in my heart are the right things to do, and they're also the things that make the most sense. And one way that is true is, you know, if you look at this this housework that people want to get rid of to the degree that they can, it's more efficient to socialize it. It just is. In terms of like the number of hours of labor per human, it's just, there's no contest. And then you look at, oh, well, where can we find some give, right? Like, what is happening here? Where are the resources being wasted? They could be going to this more efficient system. And if you abolish profit, right? If you stop letting one class of people, a small class of people, survive on the stolen surplus labor of the rest of us, then like these things seem a lot more feasible, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely, that's the real answer to your question earlier, right? Like, there is one class of people who don't do anything and live high on the hog, or whatever the hell the saying is.
Welfare queens, you mean, right?
and they're capitalists, right?
And what did Reagan call them? The strapping bucks buying steaks and driving their Cadillacs. You know, these welfare kings.
Yeah, it was
very racially. Anyways, I'm sorry.
Capitalists are the
mares,
real welfare royalty.
Yeah.
Well, that's the irony of it, right?
Yeah,
And Reagan really represents, you know, the backlash to this, which of course we cannot gloss over. This even throwing the word welfare out there just triggers a lot of people, even liberals. You mentioned Moynihan.
Trigger the libs.
Yeah. It'll even trigger some socialists too, you know, because there are a lot of socialists out there who are very much workerists, right?
Yeah.
They want, you know, something like a federal jobs guarantee because, like Jamie was saying before, they see the proletarianization of everybody as one of the preconditions in order to somehow eliminate proletarianization. So can you tease that out a little bit?
Well, I mean, I certainly think on that point that one of the final frontier of respectability politics that has been so hard to break down is the kind of workerist work ethic, right? You can sort of be lots of different variations of things, but as long as you prove that you're a hard worker, it's fine. And they really were the kind of, they just, I think, sought to really dismantle respectability politics in all aspects, right? They were really sex positive. They fought a number of really restrictive rules where you weren't allowed to have a man in the house if you were receiving welfare, right? Then he would be responsible for paying for these midnight raids that they would conduct, this kind of policing of women's sexuality, or they were being forced to be sterilized in order to receive welfare benefits. So this like real expansive demands for bodily autonomy, for the right to money that they could do with as they chose, right? To not be kind of accountable to how they were spending it or with whom. And I think that that's a really important intervention, right? Even in the days where we've kind of made headway in, at least feminists have, I think, in a kind of variety of like women can dress slutty or they can dress prim, and these are all valid feminisms, right? Like they were sort of, I really picture them as like the grandmas of this. They ushered in the way, and the thing that we have forgotten about that they really emphasized was this final frontier of like, and also fuck work.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. So I also want to ask you a question that I also asked Tithi Bhattacharya when she was on Majority Report.
Girl crush forever.
Hell yeah. We're
I
definitely
love
going to
her.
get her on one of these days.
Hillary Clinton is the anti-queen, and Tithi is the real queen.
The real queen.
The true queen.
She's a literal communist, you idiot.
Indeed. So, we've seen like a lot of the social contract has broken down since the 70s, as we've seen this shift towards neoliberalism and austerity. And like a lot of the once robust welfare programs that were still pretty robust in the 70s have gone away as budgets have been cut and wealth has been transferred even further up the ladder to the 1%. I always have to say that in my Bernie voice.
Of course.
And like this New Deal social democracy, right? It wasn't ever going to be enough, but it at least acknowledged that the reproductive labor done mainly by women had some price tag on it and was to be included in something like the family wage. Whereas
Right.
now we're all expected to just like take all of these costs on ourselves, and it's very much individualized as a matter of individual choice. Like, oh, well, if you want to have a child, if you can't afford to care for children, you shouldn't have them, without recognizing that, if the working class stopped having kids, there would be no workers and the fucking economy would collapse. So
Can I just jump in and just get real mad for a second?
please.
Okay.
How pure is your hate?
So fucking pure right now. It reminds me of these fucking articles that you read in like, not even like fucking Bloomberg or like Business Insider, but like, the New York Times or like fucking New Republic or whatever, where they like, do you want to have a child? And they like, it's like a budget. They like break down all the costs for you. Like over the course of 18 years, one child will cost you $745,000. Calculate your income and see how many children you can fucking have. How deranged and inhuman and quantitatively fucking distorted society do we have that this is the way that we're making decisions about bringing children into the world and reproducing the next generation of people? It is a fundamentally inhumane way of understanding the world to try to quantify these fucking things. How much is it, how much is 1 year of a woman's domestic labor worth, compared to, how much we can actually get out of, tax revenues and this, that, and the other thing. The whole thing is so fucking perverse. And what I respect a lot about the people that you're talking about in this movement, and a lot of this is new to me, is that they saw through this bullshit.
Totally.
I love it when you said, if this system cannot afford us a humane life, then fuck the system.
Yeah. I mean, I'm extrapolating some. They didn't go quite that far. The welfare rights movement went that far, but they did. I mean, they brought it to the Supreme Court. They attempted to like figure out a way to read the Constitution as enshrining a constitutional right to life that would guarantee all of the necessities of that life, right?
Except for unborn children, of course.
Yeah.
Think of the children.
But going back to my question,
Did I derail it with my anger? I'm sorry.
a little bit, but that's
hate.
always welcome.
Okay, all right.
Here at the Antifada, that is in the Antifada mindset.
I will stop being so toxic and masculine now.
Yes, that's also fine. So given that a lot of this reproductive labor was and is performed in the service of capital, and given that that sort of agreement is going away now, where we're just expected to pay for it ourselves, and the powers that be don't even acknowledge that this stuff benefits capital, right? If you want to get welfare, you have to work. You have to do extra work in exchange for it. Like it's really bad in a lot of ways. Clearly, people are struggling. People are dying. It fucking sucks. But like, does this create some sort of an opening for an even more radical solution that goes beyond the compromises of the New Deal and the Great Society?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. I really think of them as a kind of rupture with the Great Society, in that they felt those programs were insufficient and sort of would always be, and that there needed to be a massive overhaul. And I think that massive overhaul that they envisioned was a lot like UBI.
UBI.
You just
Universal
said the magic word.
Basic income.
Not
What's
to be
the
confused
thing?
with a UTI.
Totally different. If we had enough UTIs, everyone could get a little bit more UBI, I suppose. But
Sorry.
sorry. No, that's good. Universal basic income is on a lot of lips right now, interestingly, in this period.
Mm-hmm.
And we might want to compare the sort of pressures of automation, Wilson, you were talking about before, and the sort of precarity and crisis of the job market to the 70s, to try to maybe think about why in places like Bloomberg, in the Wall Street Journal, they're talking about a universal basic income. Why some countries, like I believe it was in Norway and Switzerland, have tried pilot programs with the UBI recently.
The Netherlands had a little pilot
Netherlands, okay.
program. Finland as well. Switzerland voted on a referendum that failed a couple of years ago.
No, we don't want free money.
I know.
Take that away from us
But
right now.
it's a
lest
hot
we
topic,
become lazy.
though, right? It's a hot topic, not just on the left, but also even on the right. There's Silicon Valley, our ruling class nerds we were talking about last episode are talking about UBI as a solution to them automating all of our livelihoods out of existence. So what's up with that? What's up with the UBI?
And maybe that interlocks with another question we have written down on the sheet here, which is, why is this important for radicals today?
Well, I think it's back today partially because despite the really low unemployment rates, like, official unemployment rates, we know that there's a lot of people that go uncounted by that. Wages are still really down and people are really struggling. Like, this fantasy of work as the solution feels very fraudulent to our generation, at the very least, if not to others, right? I mean, we're all working a ton and can't make ends meet.
For people working 70 hours a week, you tell them, oh, we're going to get more work for you. You're like, how much more time do I have?
Right.
This might be a digression, but like, it really fucking chaps my ass that at any other point in 20th century history, probably, I would be making a comfortable middle-class living as a writer in the portion of my career that I'm currently in. But I am not. And most of the writers I know, even the very successful ones, do other things on the side, whether it's consulting or sex work or like fucking anything, so that they can support what they love to do.
And that's not just in New York. Like, one of the things that we kept hearing about out of those teacher strikes in Oklahoma and West Virginia, right? People with a solid, what used to be middle-class job, driving Uber, working at the grocery store,
Right.
farming, like a whole range of the second and third jobs that they had to hold in order to be able to afford to be a teacher. Like, so I think there's a kind of legitimacy of work as the means to a good life that is being challenged by the difficulties that we are all facing. And there is the technological, right? There's this massive divide between productivity and income. So it's very clear to us now who's gaining all of the benefits of the productivity increases.
Like, I was always afraid that I would never become successful, but I didn't realize that I could become somewhat successful and still be fucking broke.
You had to clarify your wish to the genie a little better.
Right? Like, yeah, exactly. That's the real legalese that got me on that loophole. Like, I figured by the time I was at the point in my career, if I ever got there where I was fucking writing for Rolling Stone, that I would not have to worry too much about money. Like, I would have, not a ton of money probably, but I don't know, like a decent like $50,000 a year, say, and that's just not the case.
A kitchen where I could chop the vegetables while you saute them both at the same time, where we weren't bumping butts the entire time.
From your mouth to God's ears, babe.
One difference too is that is the transnational nature of capital and capitalist production nowadays. So for all the talk of like this resurgent social democracy and the UBI, things are vastly different in terms of where things are made, where the profits are going, how quickly capital can move from one place to another, and also the relative, I wouldn't even say capabilities, but prerogatives of the individual nation state, in order to kind of rein in capital or keep capital inside, which adds a very very different sort of dimension to this UBI and this automation question, right? Because no longer can you kind of wall off your Herrenvolk, social democratic United States from like these outside forces, right? A UBI on a, nationwide scale almost seems like it's insufficient at this point in time if, things are being produced in Malaysia and China and then being sent to the US and people are working shitty service jobs here. I think you get where I'm going with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the question of immigration has always been one that kind of plagues folks who are into UBI, right? What is the community that you're talking about, and how will you sort of police outsiders, right? If it's a national program, how strict will your borders have to be? Or how long will people have to be in the country before you allow them to have this benefit as well? I mean, I think that to me is probably one of the thornier technical questions. But I still think that in the way that it allows us to really think about a life where income and labor are decoupled and labor is decommodified, that it's one of the most compelling solutions. And to me, it's certainly... And I think that the women that I study have a lot to say on this, right? That there are ways that full employment programs are really unappealing, especially because I think that we can fairly safely assume that one can't just create awesome jobs out of thin air, and that folks who are really kind of fetishize full employment programs don't take into account the history of, attempts at government as last resort employment, like in the U.S., especially during the New Deal, how difficult it was to implement any of those public works programs and how quickly they had to be rescinded, really, like before the economy had even fully recovered, because the business communities were just losing their minds over the government providing jobs for people at decent wages.
This gets to, I think, the heart of what is radical about both UBI and a federal jobs guarantee. And part of why I'm relatively agnostic on them is that it would drive the fucking capitalists crazy. With a UBI, what it essentially does is take away what you, babe, said before about the threat of, the implicit threat of not going out to work is you starve to death or you're homeless. So UBI takes that power implicit in the capitalist social relation and eliminates it. Right? It says that you're going to presumably get enough basic income that you don't have to go work for any job at any wage, right? There's going to be a floor that you can't fall under. And the federal jobs guarantee, as Wilson pointed out in the New Deal, drives capitalists crazy because all of a sudden now, the slack, as they call it in the labor market, is completely gone, which gives workers tons more freedom to be militant and radical and demanding, not just with wages, but on the shop floor, how things are run, this, that, and the other thing. So UBI and a federal jobs guarantee both do these things, which is that could swing, if done correctly, radically the power that labor has. Labor, not even in the organized sense, but wage labor is, to make demands and to actually win them, because with zero unemployment or zero threat of starving to death, you don't have to take a job at $9 an hour, doing backbreaking, horrible work for some asshole boss.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea behind it is it's sort of analogous to the public option, but with jobs instead of healthcare. So like, and they would all be at $15 an hour minimum wage. And I think that's the federal jobs guarantee plan that Bernie Sanders has laid out. Correct me if I'm wrong. So like it creates a floor that people can't fall below, and it makes people less afraid of losing their jobs in a labor action or whatever. So they could just go out and find a decent government job that pays $15 an hour. And also, I think a lot of these jobs, at least as folks like Derek Hamilton have described it, would be in service of fulfilling and returning these basic social services to people, or in some cases giving it to them for the first time, like healthcare. If we were to have a national health service, that would be an enormous employer, as well as socialized care work for children or the elderly, as well as rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. So I think it's like a short-term solution, probably. Yep. But I get where you're coming from, and I think a lot of people would criticize it as a kind of workfare, albeit much better than the kind that we had, say, under Clinton in the 90s. But yeah, I guess Sean wants to say something now.
No, I'd throw it to Wilson on that because she threw out a good point, right? Which is that, you know, you were saying, oh, instead of like, you know, wiping my own grandfather's ass at home, we're now going to go out, you're going to give me a certain amount of money to live off of, but I'm going to go do it for a government job, you know, socially, workfare, doing the same thing, but in a more alienated way. So in a sense, the federal job guarantee doesn't even really overcome that fundamental alienation issue.
Yeah, I don't personally think that it does.
It's better than working at Walmart, though, right?
Sure, but being in charge of
capitalism's better than feudalism.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the famous Joan Robinson quote: "The only thing worse than not being exploited is being exploited," or vice versa. Now I've made it.
You have indeed said that on the show before. You are of the Antifada mindset.
Being exploited is not being exploited.
It's an unemployment argument.
Yeah, that's fair.
The point that I wanted to make too is that, you know, Silicon Valley and others have floated this UBI thing, and now some liberal Democrats, for, you know, good faith or just opportunistic reasons, are talking about full employment again, which we haven't done since the 1970s, even rhetorically, right? The big question is, you know, who's the constituency for this? You know, who out there in Trump's America, you know, are going to want to have this massive government intervention, no matter what the program might be, right? They hate, you know, minorities, they hate immigrants, right? They're very protective of their personal property. You know, they have guns and they are, you know, teacots and fucking angry white men, right? There's a really great article, and it's actually an opinion piece from July 19th called Liberal Blind Spots. It could just end with that. Every New York Times op-ed could just be liberal blind spots. But no, this one's really good.
That's the secret title. That's the real title.
This is by Sarah Schmarsh. Liberal blind spots.
That's not a real name.
No, it's a real Sarah Schmarsh.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Schmarsh.
Hey, look, she's got good infosec, right? Although nobody could make up that name. All right, so it's called Liberal Blind Spots Are Hiding the Truth About Scare Quote Trump Country. So it says, for one thing, it's not Trump country. Most struggling whites I know here live a life of quiet desperation, mad at their white bosses, not resentful towards their coworkers or neighbors of color. So similar to what is happening in this history that you're describing to us, right? This whole article, and people should read it because it's good and it's amazing it made it into the Times, shows that this radical or potentially militant discontent with work and not just the material gains that you get from your wage labor in your shitty job or even decent job, but the dignity, right? And the domination that you face every day, and the inability to piss when you want to piss. You know, you have to show up at a certain time every day. Once you're in there, your free speech rights go away. It's this private tyranny, right? It's in this article, in this op-ed, they're talking about this happening in Trump country. So a lot of these people who made a very poor choice in pulling the lever for our orange man, they could potentially be persuaded towards very progressive or potentially like non-reformist reform programs, because if you look at it, more people feel in their day-to-day the exploitation and domination of the bosses than they do the government. But there is no political or even media force out there that's pushing that narrative and giving voice to these people who feel this discontent.
I mean, I just saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez making just that point on the news the other day when she had a joint, I think she had some sort of joint appearance with Bernie Sanders. And, you know, the quote-unquote liberal media is very quick to wave away victories like hers by saying, oh, well, what works in the Bronx would never play in Middle America. What Middle America needs, and what Democrats need to win elections in Middle America, is to move to the center, aka to the right, and become moderates. And she said that's just not fucking true. She has strong class politics that do not conflict in any way with her conception of, quote, identity politics. It's all tied together. And she said wherever there are working class people, these politics are going to succeed. What they are saying is bullshit. And I thought that was really inspiring.
I hope that that's correct. And I think that there is no political party in the United States that has stood on that platform in a mass way. I don't think in U.S. history, maybe the Socialist Party back in the early 20th century or the American Labor Party back in the 1940s. But I think that what you talk about with AOC and Bernie Sanders, you know, as much as their vision and their critique we might find insufficient, it is opening the doors to these ideas like UBI, federal jobs guarantee, right? We do have an opening right now on the left. And, you know, like those women did back in the 60s and 70s, that door has been slightly cracked open, so maybe we can kick it the fuck open, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, like, that jump from hating your boss to really critiquing capitalism is, you know, it's a big jump, and that it takes, for lack of a better word, consciousness raising, mobilizing, right? I mean, in the same way that women have sort of felt isolated in marriages and hated their husbands, but not been able to make the leap to critiquing patriarchy, that it requires a kind of organized, ideological, cohesive thing otherwise we can sort of stay stuck in, like, TGI Fridays, right? Like, yeah, everybody loves Friday, but no one can think about what if every day was Saturday.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. You don't hate Mondays. You hate capitalism.
Or and I'm thinking now about what you just said, like this disgruntled, attitude towards the boss started to express itself in the 1980s with going postal, you know, and shooting up your fucking job place and like shooting your boss. I mean, that's not cool. We had a guy in my union last year who got laid off by a foreman, and he went home and he got a handgun. And he went to the job site, went up to the 13th floor where they were pouring concrete, and this guy shot his foreman in the face and then killed himself, which does show that this guy was somewhat disgruntled towards his work situation. But that is not, let's say, a very effective way of moving things forward in a progressive direction. So I agree with you. You're right. Instinctually, it's there, but obviously this anger needs to be focused at who is really benefiting from this, and who really ultimately is to blame, and who is our class enemy, which of course is the capitalist class and their lackeys, the running dogs.
Yeah, it goes back to our friend Jared's story that he wrote for Vice, right? I punched my boss in the face, which is a great headline. It was very satisfying for him to punch his boss in the face, who's also your boss, not coincidentally.
Everybody out there, just close your eyes for 5 seconds and just imagine punching your boss in the face. Okay, Jamie, go.
I don't want to punch my boss in the face.
No, not you. I meant our listeners.
Hello?
You love Sam Cedar.
I do. I am a real...
You punch me in the face, do you see?
I have a real Sam Loyalist. As bosses go, he's not bad. Not bad at all.
He's like your dad and your boss.
He's got big dad energy. Anyway.
Oh, man.
I'm sure, as satisfying as it was for our friend Jared to punch his boss in the face, he ultimately recognized that that was something he did by himself, and it didn't really get him anything in the long term. So really, he was just punching himself. And we only get what we want, and we only go to a productive place in the long term when we act collectively. And I think that is a big way that people get class consciousness, is when they act collectively as a group.
Yes.
Like I
Totally.
saw some teachers speak at the Socialism conference in Chicago recently, and there was one lady, I think she was from West Virginia, actually. I gotta fact check that after the show. But she said, you know, I had a moment where I was in the kitchen with my husband, and I said, you know, our labor belongs to us. And she never thought of it that way, but but they were both like, yeah, it does belong to us. And like from that moment forward, they were just and they gained this consciousness in the course of just like organizing in order to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's all that they could do. And from that moment forward, they were just so conscious. It's so fierce
Mm-hmm.
in fighting collectively for their rights. And I don't know, I think leftists of all stripes have found those struggles really inspiring and would like to see more of the same.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why it annoys me so much that my union, the PSC, is just such a sort of wet blanket on any kind of militancy, because I think it's precisely through militancy that we gain more militancy, right? It's not by sort of waiting for someone to tell us what to do that we build a strong and powerful union.
Yeah,
And these
totally.
women, the NWRO women, they were totally radicalized through the struggle, right? It wasn't necessarily that they set out to become these political actors, but that they realized that was their power.
Now, I want to go back to something we talked about way back when we talked about struggles that aren't happening necessarily at the point of production, but organizing that's happening outside of that and the potentials of that. You know, you would get the sense from this talk that, you know, people only do things out of their own material self-interests, or that, you know, it takes a leap of consciousness to, you know, get beyond that. There's the most amazing and probably most inspiring strike story, I think, in U.S. labor history is one that I think shows the power of having not just organizations like unions, militant unions within the workplace, but also having the kind of organizing you were talking about with these welfare rights militants in the 70s. In the height of the labor fight back in 1934, this is when there were massive strikes, wildcat strikes, sit-down strikes, recognition strikes. This is basically the hottest year in American labor history. We had 3 general strikes in 1 year, and we've only had one since then in 1948. But there was a plant called Autolite. It was in Toledo, Ohio. And this is the Great Depression, and the folks there had a union as they were building, machine parts. And basically the company decided that they wanted to get rid of the union, so they locked the workers out. Now, what would happen today if you locked the workers out and said, you're going to be decertified, we're going to get replacement workers, is that you'd find, thousands and thousands of people who would line up for, even a decent non-union job in that factory. But what had happened in the level of militancy and the level of organization and the level of class consciousness, let's call it, in Toledo, Ohio in 1934, led a bunch of commies, and, we jokingly talk shit on Trots, but they were Trotskyists. They had formed the year before an unemployed workers union. Now imagine that, right? That's like like a welfare rights organization, right? How do you have a union of people who are unemployed? Well, basically they got all the unemployed in Toledo together, and they said, you know what, you're workers too. You might be out of the workplace right now. You might not be selling your labor at this moment. You may be the reserve army of labor, as Marx called it. But here's a union card, right? And pay your dues someday when you get a job. So when the bosses, right, they had, they were basically, they opened the gates. The picketers were outside, and they basically thought that their strike was going to fall apart because all these replacement workers were going to come in. They saw this giant line of men coming up to the gates. They're like, "Up, here come the scabs. Here come the replacement workers." And as this group of striking workers and these new workers arrived to each other, all of the unemployed workers union members took out their union cards and raised them in the air, and then the strikers realized what happened, and they took their union cards out and waved them in the air, and the unemployed workers joined the picket lines and shut the factory down until the management caved.
Oh, hell yeah.
So that goes to show that this is not, some wild-eyed fantasy shit. When you have organizing outside of the point of production, you can make real wins when it comes to actual, labor struggles that shut shit down. And ultimately, the Autolite strike in Toledo was won in 1934 because they organized everybody so that nobody would fucking scab.
Mazel tov. Yeah, and another point I wanted to make about quote-unquote red states that they really touched upon at the socialism conference, at the teachers' plenary talk, is that, quote-unquote coastal elites want to paint all of these folks with the same brush and say this is Trump country. But I think in West Virginia, only something like 27% of the population actually voted for Trump. So that kind of puts the lie to when folks like Joyanne Reed say, oh, you teachers, you hate austerity. Why did you vote for Trump? Why didn't you vote for Hillary? Like, shut the fuck up. So we want to talk about UBI for a minute, right? We've seen people on the left and on the right making arguments in favor of it. And it always makes me a little nervous when I see some like technocratic libertarians advocating for a specific policy. So what are some of the left critiques of UBI? What are the different ways it could be carried out? And this might be a question, like a couple questions from now, but like, how do you see UBI fitting into sort of a long-term socialist horizon? Because I know a lot of people have portrayed it as at least potentially a kind of non-reformist reform that eventually brings us closer to socialism.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly one of the leftist critiques is that it's been popular on the right and from technocrats and from, Barack Obama last week mentioned that maybe a UBI would be necessary in his homage to Nelson Mandela.
Alarm bells start going off.
Right. Hillary Clinton in her, What Went Wrong book or whatever.
What happened? I believe the title was How You All Failed Me.
Did she really fucking say something about UBI in that
I think
book?
she said,
Wow.
I wanted to go for it, but I wasn't sure it was the right time or something. Like, she was like, I would be on board with that.
She said that about everything, but
Right.
the fact that she felt compelled to say it about UBI in the book does say something, right?
Yeah, I mean, but UBI has always been something that had supporters from the right and from the left, right? It's constantly been, Milton Friedman was a big proponent in the Nixon put forward this plan, right? In 1971, the Family Assistant Plan.
I'm assuming that the right, like Milton Friedman and Richard Nixon wanted it for different reasons than the left. My understanding is that Milton Friedman wanted basically for it to replace all of the other welfare, Social Security, Medicaid type programs that exist and have it just be sort of like the distributional equivalent of like a flat tax, right?
Like you get this check and then it's the Hunger Games everywhere else. I think that with policy, it's always, always, always a truism that the devils are in the details,
right.
And what the amount is set at, right? Nixon wanted it set at $1,600 or $1,700 a year. The NWRO wanted it set at, their initial demand was $5,500, and in a couple of years it went up to $7,500, which would be the equivalent of around $32,000 a year in current dollars. So the amount of money certainly would make a big difference. I think that there's a lot of ways that, what are we willing to trade in order to get it is a big question, right? Like, will we give up universal health care and just buy everything on the market? I think all of these things depend on the strength of the social forces at a time in which we're mobilizing for it. And I'm against concessionary bargaining of all kinds. I don't think we give up anything. I think we just want more.
Can you tell my union delegates that?
Yeah, tell mine too, please.
Jesus.
And the thing that freaks me out about it, especially when you hear libertarians like Elon Musk talking about it. Shout out to my space baby, Lonnie. This song's for you.
See you on a space flight.
But like the idea, because they know where this is going. They want to automate all the jobs that they can. And after they do that, they want us hoi polloi to have just enough so that we can live in poverty and not cut their heads off.
Yeah.
And I fucking chafe against that. Sorry.
Part of me feels like they're pretty bright people and they see trends. I mean, they're obviously fucking socially backwards and nerdy sociopaths who are happy to exploit people and destroy the planet while they do some woo meditation retreat in the fucking ski slopes of Utah. But like, part of me feels like they actually do realize the implications of the technologies and the automation that they are in the process of trying to create right now. And so perhaps like the fact that they're into it shows that maybe there is something to this. Like, you know, automation through capitalist development has always led to increased jobs in other sectors. But maybe the capitalist class or sectors of it, the more forward-thinking sectors, are starting to be like, yeah, well, maybe if we automate all the clerical work, all the service industry work, all the trucking, you know, all of like the cars and everything like that.
Even the like mundane legal work, right?
Yes,
that lawyers used to do.
And even teaching now. You've got Jamie's. You were at that horrible Ozy Fest, and the woman was talking about what entrepreneurial education and
God.
like one teacher teaching like 5,000 kids. So
It
there
was
go
so
all your
dark.
teachers, like millions of teachers in the United States, automated out of existence.
But it's every teacher's dream to reach thousands of students all over the world via the magic of the webcam technology and not even have to talk to the parents. Like, that is actually advertised as a benefit on the VIP Kid website. And the starting salary, I looked it up on the website, is like $14 an hour plus incentives.
Dude, and this is parenthetical, but part of the reason why those teachers who struck in all those states, and especially West Virginia, were powerful is because teachers and parents have a relationship, right? And that's part of like being in this care educational type work. And if they can destroy that connection, and along with collective bargaining, and along with like, you know, that school as an actual physical place, then all the fucking better. But then maybe what they're worried about is, well, yeah, like you said, you know, eventually they're going to come and they're going to fucking guillotine it. Madame Guillotine's always in the fucking back of their minds, or should be.
It should be.
That's why
Probably
they
not
want to
enough.
dissolve the social bonds.
That's right.
I mean, I think that we could think about a lot of the like really big benefits that a UBI would have that maybe could like get us closer to socialism. And one is like, one of my favorite descriptions of a UBI is as an unlimited strike fund.
Hell yeah.
Right?
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
How do we build power? It's by giving people the ability to walk away and to not be terrified by what's going to happen when they walk away. That's even more than the Taylor Law. That's the reason that every adjunct I speak to at CUNY says is, you know, I can't afford to lose my job. I couldn't even possibly think about going on strike. Like the kind of power that we could imagine the working class having when it is no longer afraid to go on strike is fairly monumental, and I think shouldn't be discounted. You know, you talk about this some with a jobs guarantee, but I work for a state institution now, and I'm not allowed to strike. So I'm not like very sure that having a jobs guarantee via the federal government would like enshrine my right to strike. And
well, I mean, you point to the flip side of a lot of this conversation too, is like these UBI proposals are being floated around, but at the same time, you know, 80 years of labor law that was actually able to tame the militancy of like that auto light strike in 1934, the general strike in San Francisco, the general strike in Minneapolis, you know, all this happening in, you know, this real high tide of workers' militancy. You know, the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act of 1934, or was it 35? One of them.
35.
35. It institutes...
Section 7A.
Thank you.
God, stop woman-splaining.
No, it's great. I love that. You're like, I'm getting boned
I think he's blushing.
Yes, I am.
Aw.
I love women who explain obscure legal labor acts.
That's
to
a
me.
niche.
Yeah, it's a real
Same.
niche. It's hard on Tinder to find that. But at any rate, no, like in a lot of ways, and I think this is a very common left critique, the uneasy truce between capital and labor that happened coming out of that period not only created, quote unquote, the great, you know, middle class of the golden age of capitalism from the 40s to the 70s, but also constrained labor's ability to actually act as a militant shop floor grassroots force that could push their demands forward. So while you have this conception of the UBI coming, they're also eliminating labor law so that, you know, if you want to throw those laws out the window, that's fine, but maybe we're going to start acting like it's 1934 again.
Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I think that also one of the things that I find really compelling about a UBI that maybe I don't feel enough leftists talk about are the kinds of environmental benefits that we could imagine. You know, the company in New Zealand is piloting a 4-day week. And they've seen like their electricity output plummet by 20%, the amount of pollution from commuting, even just, you know, when we talk about the coal miners and the kind of like wanting them to be able to have good lives, and that often having been tied to this horrifically polluting industry, that I think that UBI is a really important intervention into that. Like, we have enough shit. We don't have to just produce shit so that people have jobs.
Right.
Yeah. We could also have more time to be able to do stuff in maybe slower ways that requires less like spending money in order to get something really quickly because we're running between our 5 fucking jobs and need to like buy all this plastic shit to, you know, feed ourselves in between those jobs.
Yeah, it's like a virtuous cycle because, like, as you said, the more we're like working 70 hours a week and jumping from job to job, the less time like we have to cook our own food, like clean our own houses. So that then becomes even more commodified because you got to stop at like, you know, McDonald's or something to pick up a burger because you're jumping from job to job to job and you don't have the time to do these things.
Yeah, not to mention something like air travel. Like, Sean and I talk quite a lot about how we're going to do things after the rev. It's like one of our favorite topics.
It's kind of pillow talk, actually.
That's cute.
One of our favorite topics to talk about, you know, after how we're going to drown both the cats in a pillowcase.
But
yeah,
that's also sexy.
Haven't done it yet.
That would not fly in my house.
Well, that's why you're not part of our poly triad yet.
What's the point of having pets if you can't talk shit about them right in front of their faces?
And
you like to do that.
And what's the point of having a marriage if you can just in post-coital bliss lay down on the mattress and imagine fully automated luxury gay space communism?
With no cats. Just kidding. With some cats.
All the cats.
Abolish
Not all
cats.
No. So, like, one of the things we like to talk about is how we're going to do things after the rev. And something like air travel could be severely limited, right? Because why do people have to fly everywhere in planes? Because they have to get back to their fucking jobs. You know what is also a good way to travel? A boat.
A sailboat that has 0 carbon emissions.
And I would really enjoy that. Just to maybe I'll take a boat next time we go to Europe, you know?
Yeah. Well, if we
not
were
not now. I have to go to work.
No,
but
no,
like,
me too.
Maybe I'll take the boat, you know, after communism when we go to Europe.
Well, this brings us back, I think, to like the fundamental point, and I think a major part of my politics and Jamie's politics, and it sounds like Wilson, your politics too, is that it's not because we come from a privileged position, because none of us are fucking rich, and it's not because we have some sort of infantile fantasies about, oh, you know, wouldn't it be so nice if I could just lay on the beach all the time like a fucking schlub? It's because, like, in real material terms, right, the productivity right now of capital, the ability for the ability to create those use values, those tangible objects that help to make our lives, you know, meaningful, but also easy, like dishwashers and things of this sort. Capitalism has the tendency, you know, towards automation. It has the tendency towards making these things with less and less inputs of not just labor, but also machinery, right? So the fundamental communist horizon is that if we were to take these things out of the profit system, if you were to take the production of goods and services out of the profit system, that you could literally have all, not just first world, but all the 8 billion people or whatever it is on Earth, radically reduce the amount of time that they spend, you know, working for somebody else for a wage, and create the sort of humane system that is based not on exchange of goods, but actually on the useful things that can be created, and automating those things to the fullest so that we progressively lessen and lessen and lessen the amount of time that we have to go through doing drudgery and, basically wasting our lives with dead time, as we do under capitalism for 40, 60, 80, and 90 hours a week. That's my vision, right? Is that we have the material means right now to overcome wage labor. And it's merely the mode of production and the social relations that we have right now under capitalism that are stopping that from happening.
Yeah, I mean, production for production's sake is just fucking stupid. Like you were talking about earlier with the environment. I know we got a little bit into the weeds on the last episode when I brought up a point that someone made at the Socialism conference, which is he cited a study saying that if we were to have a Green New Deal, the amount of economic activity that would be generated by that under capitalism would basically cancel out any environmental benefit that we would get from it. Yeah. And that kind of tracks with what you're just saying. And I feel like a lot of people don't always make the connection between this kind of economic activity, production for production's sake, and the ways in which the environment gets destroyed.
Socialists haven't been forced to reckon with this, I think, so intensely as we are in this generation. It's always been a kind of like the immediate concern is making sure that we can produce enough, at least, in Russia or the Soviet Union, or figuring out how to get everyone jobs. But those can't be our main concerns anymore, right? We are like so clearly aware of the catastrophic wreckage that climate change is causing around us. I mean, even from our little privileged bubble in Brooklyn.
But I thought we were going to solve it through entrepreneurship and technological innovation. Is that not true? Did Ozy Fest lie to me?
It was all lies. You spent $112 for a day of lies.
Oh my God, you had to pay for that?
Plus the $5 for the acid or whatever it costs.
Oh yeah, I mean, I got paid to write the article, but are there any more critiques you want to make of UBI?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't want to beat a dead horse. One of the critiques that folks raise, especially feminists, about UBI is that it would just further entrench the gendered division of labor. So that better policies that they would hope for would be like better childcare or better maternity leave or those kinds of things. And I think that we can ask for those and ask for UBI as well. Their fear is that women will just be stuck doing the things that they have always been stuck doing because it will sort of make more financial sense. And I think this is really one of the examples where the kinds of problems that people run into and having these high-level theoretical arguments without looking at the history of how people have approached this. Or, we haven't even talked about the many experiments that have been conducted on UBI and the kinds of really remarkable feminist outcomes that those showed. So in Manitoba in the 70s, they conducted a big UBI experiment that a friend, David Kalinske, has written about extensively. And one of the big findings from that was that rates of domestic violence plummeted and divorce rates increased.
Awesome.
Right? Because women had the means to leave abusive marriages. I mean, we don't know exactly what the causal mechanisms are, but we can certainly assume that women had the means to leave some abusive marriages. Maybe some of the stress factors causing domestic abuse were mitigated by people not having the terror of financial instability hanging over them.
Which is almost not you can't do a direct correlation between that and, like you were saying before, the unlimited strike fund. But if you look at the domestic sphere of the home as a place of production, then it's the same thing, right? It's like a strike fund for women who don't want to deal with abuse anymore, who don't want to deal with shitty partners anymore, who can walk away.
To exactly what I was saying about Me Too, right? And the sort of political limits of the way it is now. We like to do a segment at the end of the Antifada called Getting Personal. It kind of fell off for the past few weeks.
Yeah, we didn't have very personable people on.
We were all,
just kidding,
that.
Nero, we love you. And Alex.
That's not nice.
You're the best tech garden gnome that the world has ever seen.
Yeah. I think we were all just like very excited to talk about the things we were talking about, and we forgot to talk about ourselves and each other.
And also really tired after hours of recording.
That is true. Not like now. I'm not tired at all right now. I'm like totally fucking awake.
You only worked 20 hours on that Rolling Stones article.
I didn't stay up late listening to Chapo to see if they said my name. That's not a thing that I would ever do.
No.
So
that didn't happen.
So anyway, we have a segment we like to call Getting Personal. And I would like to kick it off with a question for you, Wilson.
Yeah.
And that is, Wilson, how many Bernie bro boyfriends do you now have as a result of rejecting Hillary Clinton and stabbing your fellow women in the back?
This is a special place in hell.
Oh my God.
And in the bed.
That was the point that Gloria Steinem made, right? I think that we just have to come full circle and take a moment. Gloria Steinem and her CIA apologist.
Oh my God. Hey, the CIA is woke now. Don't get it twisted.
Is the most vile form of bourgeois feminism.
Seriously.
And the fact that people worship her because she's pretty is so abhorrent. And you are a terrible, terrible feminist if you like Gloria Steinem because she's pretty and you look past her CIA apology bullshit.
That ass.
As one of my favorite historical figures once said, 4 walls is 3 too many for Gloria Steinem.
Ooh. Hey, I don't like Gloria Steinem because she's pretty.
Wait, who said
I
that?
like her
That
because
was
she's
Stalin,
a bougie-ass piece of shit like me, all right? Get it? Right.
That was Tanky Lena Dunham right there. That's a character Jamie's working on, Tanky Lena Dunham.
I'm still working out the kinks.
That has a very niche audience.
Yeah, people who subscribe to Lenny letter and also, I don't know, like uphold the immortal science of Mao Zedong thought. I don't know.
There's like maybe 12 people in New York City right now.
That's the core audience we're looking for. If we can get 12 people to listen 1,000 times to every episode, we'll be doing great.
I asked our guest a question.
I'm sorry. Go on.
P.S. I asked Liza the same question, so you got a pretty high bar to
Yeah.
meet.
Oh, man,
You
you
versus
have-
Liza Featherstone.
You've been asking me the same questions as my all-time greatest hits of Marxist feminism. Love Liza.
Liza's good people. We should all have dinner sometime again soon. I know that.
let's do that.
All of us never had dinner together, but I know you've had Doug and Liza's excellent
You've had
cooking,
dinner with
as
them,
have we.
and we've
so
had dinner with them.
We should all have dinner.
Let's have dinner.
together.
They're out of town, I think, for the rest of the summer, but we'll make it happen.
They'll be
Cool.
back.
They'll be back. Very important question.
How many Bernie bro boyfriends did I score from?
Stabbing
You
your fellow
heard me.
women in the back by undermining the Kafkan-garbed goddess of feminism.
Oh man, that was
Mother
a dark
Hillary.
time. Was anyone getting laid then? It was just so traumatizing.
Not even Trump
According
was
to
getting laid.
Gloria Steinem and Madeleine Albright, we were.
I think I actually was sleeping with the one black Trump supporter in Brooklyn at
Oh
that
my
time.
God.
So it was
You
a
found him.
That
very,
is from the plot of Girls.
very confusing moment in my life.
Wait, isn't that actually a plot out of Girls from
It
Lena
is.
Dunham?
Was it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't seen that.
See? It's all coming
Maybe
together
it does
now.
reflect our reality.
She
after all.
has been stealing a lot of plot lines in my life, having grown up in New York and Tribeca with like an arty mom.
Yeah.
I mean, same. The narcissism of small differences is definitely an accusation that's been leveled at me before, due to my dislike for Lena Dunham. But I don't even hate the show Girls. Like, I think it's pretty good, actually. I just don't like it when she tries to run her mouth off about political things that she has no fucking clue about, like sex work.
Is it fair to say, Wilson, that like your life story would be like Lena Dunham, like if you had a soul? If she had a soul, I mean, like you're like Marxist Lena Dunham.
Yeah, and with less terrible tattoos.
Hell yeah.
I think the agent for what's her name? She's a really good writer.
Gloria Steinem.
Yeah, the agent for this really good writer that I follow on Twitter, whose name I can't remember, like
Heidi
to tell
Matthews.
people she's like definitely not her. She's like Lena Dunham without the money.
You?
No, this
the
writer whose
writer.
name escapes me. I'll probably cut this part out because I can't remember.
And you keep it in. Hang her by her own
she's
petard.
really good though, and she kind of is. But no.
Anyways, Wilson.
Yeah.
Back to the question.
Stop
at hand.
stalling.
Yeah. So you're
Stop stalling. Tanky Lena needs to know.
you were banging out a black Trump supporter during the election season, which was very, very woke of you.
I can't believe I just confessed this on air.
You're allowed to.
I've told very few people. This was really
hot scoops.
Truly a
spicy takes.
Top secret.
Was the sex worth it? Is the question.
Oh God, yes. That was the only thing that was worth it.
Fair.
Oh, sidebar. You know what plot she stole from my life?
Who, Wilson?
No, but maybe. I hope not. Don't do this. When she's like trying to break up with Adam, spoiler alert, and he just starts jerking off. And he's like, oh, just stay here and I'm going to jerk off in front of you. And she's like, she just kind of stands there until he comes, and it's really gross and weird and kind of violent.
Wait, so Louis C.K. was dating Lena Dunham at the time?
Or Jamie?
Unfortunately.
Wait, did you date Louis C.K.? What the fuck is happening?
Unfortunately, there's more than one guy who does that.
Did this just become the woke Howard Stern show?
I think it might be, yeah.
You know what? That might not be a bad mark to hit. We're already what the Brunigs would sound like on Uppers and with more of an edge, according to one of our nice, kind reviewers.
See, if this was like woke Howard Stern, like it would be me on the Sibian, riding the Sibian, and like you listening to my orgasms and like laughing at me while I did it.
I can't tell.
All right, check
more
your ass,
disturbing.
cash, babe.
Oh no,
We're working on it.
Jamie is walking towards the cabinet. What's she pulling out?
You think there's not a Sibian in this office? Sam used to do the real radio. I assume every radio DJ has a Sibian hanging around somewhere. Every radio DJ from the 90s.
When they initiate you into the Air America Club, they give you a complimentary Sibian to ride.
It's fair trade Sibian. for a liberal crowd, liberal audience.
Exploitation free. It was crafted by Guatemalan artisans out of only the finest fair trade materials.
Indeed.
Imagine like a Sibian made of wood. I think that's just called.
That sounds splintery.
Yeah, well, we'll work on that concept. I mean, Antifada has to get some branded material, like some merch eventually. Maybe we'll make like a woke fair trade
Saddles.
Yeah, that says Antifada on it, and it's like for insertion into orifices, but not women's, only men's.
That's
because
not what
that's
a
only
Sibian
fair.
does.
I thought a Sibian, isn't it a dildo that also like
Oh
vibrates?
my God. You're so innocent.
Do you have a
Maybe.
Sibian? Is there a Sibian in our house? Whoa, pregnant pause.
I'm
so
really
glad I'm privy to
expensive.
this moment.
They look like a little too intense for me. Like if I don't like the Hitachi Magic Wand, I probably wouldn't like the Sibian either. Oops, TMI. Maybe the branded Sibian will be like when we hit 1,000 patrons or something.
Oh shit, that's
It'll
a great
be our
idea. Patreon's
special reward for our Antifa superstars.
Wait, but how much money would that cost to send a branded Sibian, like handcrafted by a Guatemalan campesino?
I think you've got a research
I don't know,
project.
we might need to add a few more tiers.
The
to our
$1,000,
membership.
the Sibian tier, $1,000.
But anyway, back to our guest and getting personal with our guest.
See, I think she's done with us being personal, but we could try.
Well, we're not done, so we're gonna keep going.
It's very warm in here.
She's got did it just get warmer in
Did it
here?
just get warm? No, it's been warm.
The question of dating while not just a feminist, not just a Marxist, but a fucking Marxist feminist.
And labor organizer.
And labor organizer. What has your experience of that been? Pretty good, or scale of 1 to 10?
Really brings the Trump boys to the yard.
It's a fucking disaster.
That's all you
I'm
got?
listening.
You don't have to say anything here that you wouldn't say to your psychotherapist or your sister.
Luckily, I don't have a sister. I have many therapists.
Thankfully, after
Dating, being a Marxist feminist. I don't know. Where does one even start? It's complicated.
you start with a peck on the cheek.
You start by going on Tinder, so they tell me.
Yeah, I think it's hard to figure out. Men are just tough creatures. Holy shit, I don't know how to say anything funny. It's all just really depressing.
I get
No,
it.
that's fine. You don't even have to go there.
Sometimes depressing things are funny. At least that's how I deal with them in my life when they happen to me. Well, you said that you had some ideas on, or some
sorry,
pearls
I
of
totally-
wisdom.
Can I just a sidebar for a second? Does everybody know who Laura Loomer is?
No.
Nope. Only vaguely. I feel like we might have made fun of her on the Majority Report.
Yeah, she's an alt-right, disgusting piece of shit. I think she's worked for Project Veritas, which was what's that fucking little douchebag's name? The fucking ginger who needs to get.
I don't know. I know who you're talking about,
You know
though.
what I mean?
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, that fucking.
You know who you are.
They destroyed Acorn and all that shit. Anyways, Laura Loomer, she worked with that fucking piece of shit. But she had a big Twitter thing where she was complaining about how men, she'd go on Tinder dates with them, and then she'd reveal that she was a Trump supporter, and they would just walk off. So here's a tweet.
Good.
Here's a tweet from her right here, Laura Loomer. This is from a couple days ago. Laura Loomer. One time, I went on a date with a 30-year-old Jewish lawyer in New York. She's Jewish, by the way. For our first and only date, he took me to his fave Mexican restaurant. When I said I voted for Trump, the guy proceeded to attack me over tacos about how mean I was for wanting the wall.
What, did he stab her with a fork or something?
I don't know, man. She can't even go on a Mexican date without some
Isn't it funny that they're all always at Mexican restaurants?
Yeah, what the
Always.
fuck?
Really pumps up the sense of dramatic irony there. However, I just misused that word.
Well, maybe it would be how in New York now, it's very rare to find an Italian making pizza at a place because it's mostly Latinos who work in the service industry nowadays. So there'd be an Italian manager, Italian American manager. Maybe they want a world where they can still have all the lit fucking Mexican food they want, but is made by fresh-faced fucking Aryan children or something like that.
Probably.
I think the quality would drop dramatically.
I'm glad that the Jewish lawyer walked out on her.
Shout out to him.
Shout out to that
Whoever
guy.
you are.
Come on Antifada.
Yep.
You sound cool.
We're willing to have you on anytime. Just hit us up, antifadamindset@gmail.com or @the_antifada on Twitter or Jamie_Elizabeth on Twitter or, I don't know, just come to our house and hang out. We live at 743 Main Street, New York, 100000001, apartment 1488.
Did you just dox the mayor or something?
I may
feel
have.
like we just doxed someone.
Oh, remember when we got drunk and we prank called the mayor's personal cell phone at 4 in the morning?
Oh my god. That was so bad.
That happened.
We're bad.
Why do you guys have the mayor's
I mean,
cell phone
I didn't do
number?
That's a
that.
good
There's no
story.
we.
No, yeah.
You
it
guys
was just,
fucking
it was,
did that.
It was me and my horrible
You're bad
friends.
sometimes.
I had my friend who will remain nameless worked on the city council for a while when de Blasio was the public advocate. And, it's a pretty incestuous little thing downtown, at the, what do you call it, City Hall down there. And, he just got de Blasio's personal phone number as the public advocate and, they'd text and chat or whatever. And a couple of months ago, we went out to my uncle's, old man bar in Woodhaven, Queens. You can imagine the scene, and we got completely fucking hammered.
Was it so woke?
It was the least woke place. I was hanging out with a NYPD detective, a retired sanitation worker, some guy from my union, and my really old great uncle who was not tending bar that night, but took more shots than all of us put together. He's a real strong man. But by the end of the night, we ended up at this really shitty hipster bar where my friends caused a lot of trouble. One of them definitely choked some guy out. They were chanting
Nightmare
at
people.
the bartender / as it turns out, owner of this bar. They were chanting Ohio at him because they just assumed he was some hipster from Ohio.
He's
and
like,
then,
I just want to go home. It was 4 a.m. They're like, yo, fuck you. You're never going home. Ohio. Ohio. I was like, what the fuck is wrong with you people?
we had a bit to drink, and then for our final act, our friend whose name starts with a D took out his cell phone and said, "Hey, you guys know I got Bill de Blasio's personal cell phone number?" And we're like, "No." And my other friend grabs a phone and he dials it, and we put it on speaker in this loud ass bar, and it only went 3 rings and it went to voicemail. But dead ass, it was like, "You've reached Bill de Blasio. I'm unavailable to take your phone call. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." But we did not have the balls to leave him a voicemail.
Why does your de Blasio sound like Cosby?
I was going to say Obama. I think that's just like your generic voice that you use now for all neoliberal politicians.
Yeah, I feel like de Blasio. I feel like he kind of has like an Obama voice for some reason. He'd be like, let me be clear. I want to do something about affordable housing by upzoning all of the black neighborhoods and getting all of them out and moving other people in.
Also, pull up your pants.
Pull up your pants.
But
It's like Cosby, Obama, de Blasio nexus.
But back to the Laura Loomer thing, like, I don't think these ghouls fucking realize that having a guy walk out on a Tinder date with you is like so much less than you deserve.
Yo.
You deserve to be in a fucking gulag
No
if you're
shit.
out there spreading racism and hatred throughout the country, on the internet, on TV, as she does.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing about these ICE protests too. Like, oh no, they can't eat dinner in a Mexican restaurant anymore.
Suck a
Like,
fucking
they
burrito.
don't deserve to be walking free. Like, a fucking loogie in their burrito is getting off so fucking easy. And like, at the very least that they should have to put up with is just having to breed with their own kind so that they don't pollute the rest of us with their rotten ideology.
And by that, she does not mean Jews. She means alt-right people.
Indeed.
Because Laura Loomer is a Jew, and what she actually deserves is her own fucking mother. She's sitting at a Mexican restaurant, and her own mother is sitting across from her. And as our fucking new Stasi comes in to fucking take her in, interrogate her, and gulag her, instead of a date walking away from her, she deserves her mother to look her in the fucking eyes, and she says, "Sorry, baby. It's for the better good," as they take her away. Is that too harsh?
Dead ass.
Yo,
So you guys have been workshopping this?
No, I just made that shit up.
Our hate is pure. It's
Laura
just,
Laura
flows
Loomer is
freely.
like I have to say, she's a alt-right horror person, but she's relatively attractive. Like she's have sexable. I think from my subjective,
if you can disaggregate the way she looks from the rottenness inside,
exactly,
which
yes.
you can't.
On the outside, she looks very attractive. So she really needs to be like a toxic fucking quasi-fascist personality for some like lawyer dude to be, instead of like, all right, cool, you like Trump, I don't care, let's eat some Mexican food, and like then just fuck. The guy just was like, whoa, you're fucking crazy, and walked the hell out. Because guys, as you know, will do a lot in order to have sex with a relatively attractive woman.
Well, I will tell you one very quick story of how my socialist feminist politics totally screwed over my date with a super hot firefighter.
When historical materialism goes wrong.
So I met this firefighter because my bike got locked up and I lost my keys, and the firefighter saved me.
Totally by accident,
that's
right?
So cute.
You're like, oh, I lost my keys. If only a
Oopsies.
strapping
Could someone help me out?
FDNY man could
The
come
best
by.
part was that they cut the lock and filled up my tires with air, and then this super hot, sweaty firefighter says to me, "Sit on it." And I was like, "What? Oh, excuse me."
Wow.
And he goes, "The bike, to see if the tires are full enough."
Oh.
I was
my
like,
God.
so then I work up the courage to say, "All right, which one of you is single?"
Hell yeah.
And they were like,
Lean in.
"Girl," they were like, "This guy, it's his turn." They literally said it's his turn.
Oh,
shit.
shit.
So I meet him later at the after hours firefighters hangout downtown.
That sounds lit, actually.
He was much less cute out of his uniform.
They always are.
But his buddy from the station shows up halfway into a drink and sits down and is like, "Oh, I'm just going to have a quick one," and then get on the train back to Long Island. And he proceeds to start rambling about how horrible Obamacare is and how no one should have health care who didn't have to go to fight in the Iraq War like he did in order to get health care. And I was
What
like,
was the sex like, though?
I looked at the hot firefighter and I looked at the ranting, foaming conservative who just hates the idea of anyone having access to health care. And I was like, okay. And I just proceeded to scream at the dude
Oh, yeah?
the whole night, and I totally blew it with the firefighter.
What, because you yell at his friend?
Yeah.
Because his friend was wrong.
His friend was
sounds like a
totally
loser.
wrong. Oh yeah, he was a loser, but he was cute. He was very cute. He would have been interesting maybe. But he dropped me off at my apartment and was like, "I think this is a little too much fire for me."
Whoa, shit.
Whoa.
Damn, so like you actually got a ride to your place and you're going to invite him up for like a cup of coffee?
I mean,
is like, this is too
No, I knew
hot
I
for
had
a
he
fight.
can
No, I
run
knew.
into a burning building and save the children inside, but he cannot handle a little socialist feminist perspective. That is sad.
That's how dangerous, these views are, which means how powerful they are.
Burn, baby, burn.
Hell yeah.
I guess you were a little too fiery for him.